Boys and girls, today we're going to do lesson 12-2, fractions and decimals on the number line. I can locate and describe fractions and decimals on number lines.
Let's start with the stop and share. What is the decimal name for each lettered point on the number lines? Tell how you decided. So let's look at these number lines, Ms. Schultz. What do we need to find?
I need to find the decimal name for each of the lettered points on the number line.
Perfect.
So I need to find A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, and I.
We have this little orange sticky here. We'll record them as we find them. What do we know already?
So I know by looking at the number line, I can identify the whole number, 0 and 1, looking at the top number line. And I noticed that it has ticks in between 0 and 1. So I can use the ticks on the number line to see how many equal parts there are between the whole numbers.
And what is the space divided into here? How many equal parts?
Let's count each tick. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So there are 10 equal parts between 0 and 1.
So if we think about that, what is the fractional length of each part?
So each space in between, so for example, from 0 to A would be 1/10. Each part is 1/10 of the whole.
I'm gonna put that sticky actually up here so we can see that as we're working.
Great.
So if we're gonna label these ticks here with fractions, what would the first one be?
Great, so I can use what I know about fractions to label this number line. So A would be 1/10 because it's the first tick mark after 0.
Okay, so then here.
2/10.
Next.
3/10, 4/10, 5/10, 6/10, 7/10, 8/10, 9/10, and then 1 whole would be 10/10.
Perfect. I'm just gonna leave the 10/10, and I'll also just mark 9/10 for us too.
Great.
So we know we started counting at 0 and continued until we reached 1.
So by looking at A, I know 1/10 as a fraction, and I also know that fractions and decimals are related from the previous lesson. And I know that if I use my place value chart that we have on top to the right, the ones place and the decimals, I could plug in 1/10 as a decimal on my number line. On my place value chart.
Let me write 1 here, and we can see what happens when we plug it in under that 10th that you're saying. You just make it a little smaller and bring it right here.
Great. So then if we had to read that as a decimal, there are no 1s because we haven't reached the whole yet. So it would be 0.1, 0 and 1/10.
So I'm gonna bring that over here under our 10th fraction.
Great. So there you can see that 1/10 as a fraction and 1/10 as a decimal are the same place on a number line, just written different ways.
And actually, we've just discovered our first letter, A.
Oh, perfect.
So we know that A is equal to
0 and 1/10.
I have a quick question. Can you just remind us why we're putting that 0 there?
So we're putting 0 because we have not reached a whole number yet. We're only looking at parts of a whole. We would reach a whole number when we've gotten to 10/10.
It's really cool to see on the number line because we see the 0 right here, and then we have our 0.1.
And 1/10.
So should we continue labeling this number line?
Great.
So where 2/10 is, what would that be in decimals?
So 2/10 would be 0.2.
Then
0.3.
After 0.3.
0.4.
And we're coming up to our next letter. What is that going to be?
0.5.
Beautiful.
Perfect.
Let me mark that on our Post-it.
So B is 0 and 5/10. And another thing I noticed is that B is halfway to 1 because 5/10 is half of 10/10.
Wow. There's also 5 tick marks before B, and there's 5 tick marks after.
Great. Let's look at C. So if B is 5/10, then that next tick mark is got to be 6/10. So therefore, C must be 7/10.
Beautiful. Let me mark that on our Post-it.
And then
Sorry.
8/10. 9/10. And for 1 whole, we could just write the number 1 or 1.0. Either or is fine.
1.0 also looks like the number 10 with the decimal in the middle. Cool.
Okay, letter
How can
D.
we find D?
So I'm noticing that letter D is before our whole number 1, which is telling me that letter D is less than 1 whole.
So how would we count to find the number? Which way do we need to count to get to D from 1?
Well, if the number line is broken up into tenths again, I can just count backwards. I know that 1 is 10/10. So if I count back, then the previous tick mark would be 9/10.
Okay.
Then 8/10. And D must be 7/10.
I'm going to add that onto our sticky. So we know that D is 7/10.
7/10. Great. So if D is before the number 1 and is less than 1 whole as 7/10, then E has to be greater than 1 whole because I see it's after the 1 on the number line.
Okay.
So that means that E is going to be greater than 1 whole.
So we could count up instead of down like before.
So now we're starting at 1.
Okay.
And we're counting up. So this would be 1 and 1/10, 1 and 2/10.
Okay. Awesome.
E has to be 1.
I'm just gonna quickly mark that
As 1 and 2/10. Great.
Add it onto our sticky. E is 1 and 2/10. Awesome. How
Okay,
can
so
we look at F?
So I can keep counting the ticks on the number line to get up to F. So if E is 1 and 2/10, then the next tick mark must be 1 and 3/10, 1 and 4/10, 1 and 5/10, 1 and 6/10, 1 and 7/10, 1 and 8/10, 1 and 9/10. So we could write that as 1.9.
I have a question, Ms. Schultz. I was looking at it also. Could we have counted from the 2 for that one?
Definitely. We could have looked at 2 and knew that 2 was 20/10. And we could have count backwards to 19/10, which is 1 and 9/10.
Cool. How can we solve G?
So G, what I'm noticing is after the whole number 3.
Okay.
So now we can count the tick marks up to G after 3. So 3 would be 1 and 3, 3 and 1/10, sorry. And G is 3 and 2/10. Because it is 2 tick marks away from the whole 3. 3 and 2/10. So to find H, we can keep counting on from G.
Okay. Oops, sorry about that.
So G would be 3 and 2/10, 3 and 3/10, 3 and 4/10, 3 and 5/10. So H would be 3 and 6/10.
There we go, 3 6/10. And should we count this one from the 4 or from the 5?
Let's try counting back from the 5.
Okay, so if we start here.
And that would be 10/10, right?
Yeah.
So it would be, if we go back, 9/10, 8/10, 7/10, 6/10, 5/10, 4/10. Okay, so 4/10, but the whole number is 4 because it hasn't reached past 5 yet. So it's that I is going to be 4 and 4/10.
So let me just, I'm so sorry. I clicked the wrong thing.
So 4.4, 4 and 4/10.
Save. I'm gonna quickly just update our post-it here.
Yep, I'll read them off to you so you can do it. So G is 3 and 2/10. H is 3 and 6/10. And I is 4 and 4/10.
Amazing.
Great job.
On the question, it does ask us how we decided. So how can we write that we decided this? What did we do in order to decide?
So we counted the tick marks or the spaces between the whole numbers. We counted the tick marks and the spaces between the whole numbers to determine how the number line was broken up. In this case, it was broken up into tenths. Perfect.
So it was just really counting that helped us to name the numbers.
Yep, using what we know about number lines and whole numbers and counting the spaces between.
Awesome. Can we try some more examples?
Yeah, let's try another one.
So here we have to name the decimal for each point on the number line. So first it's asking us about E.
Okay, so let's
over here.
E. Okay, so let's do the steps that we did before. Let's first find out how the number line is broken up. So I can see in the top number line, it goes from 0 to 1 to 2. So I'm going to count the tick marks in between 0 and 1 just to see how the number line is broken up.
Okay.
So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. So again, it's broken up into tenths. But then what I notice is that it kind of expands a tenth and it breaks a tenth up again in the second number line into hundredths.
Okay.
So let's take a look at E first and then we can work towards F. So I'm noticing that E is right after the decimal 0 and 5/10. And it's
I also noticed, Michelle, they have like smaller tick marks and then a bigger tick mark for this to show us.
Right. So that is also pointing out that 5/10 is 1/2 and is another benchmark decimal or fraction we could use. So the tick mark after 5/10 is E, which would make that 6/10. So how can we write that as a decimal? 0.6, 0 and 6/10.
Great. How can we look at F? I know you mentioned something about hundredths, and I also see a little note on the side. It's telling us to remember that greater numbers are farther to the right and on the number line.
Right, so as we're moving to the right of the number line, the numbers are getting bigger. So what I'm noticing that F is further along the number line than E, so it's going to be a bigger decimal than E. What I'm also noticing is that it's part of a triangle and a pullout, that they took H, and which looks like H is H is 1 4/10.
I'm going to bring that right here for us.
Perfect.
Now let's look at the second number line. I'm noticing that it almost looks like they're pulling something out from our first number line. We have here, you just said 1 4/10, and before that would be 1 3/10. So it looks like in this triangle, they're pulling it out, and we're ending up with 1 3/10 and 1 4/10, the space in between that.
Yes. So what they're doing with the space in between 1 3/10 and 1 4/10 is they're breaking it, dividing it into tenths again.
So the tick marks here are 10 spaces apart again.
In between 1 3/10 and 1 4/10, which actually brings us to the next place value in decimals, the
So
hundredths place.
that's what we're looking at over here.
Right. So 1 30/100 is also the same as saying 1 3/10.
Let me just grab a couple manipulatives so we could look at this.
Good idea.
So here we have 3 longs.
Yep.
So what does this represent?
So that would be our 3/10.
Okay, there's 3 longs with 10 pieces in each one.
Correct.
So in order to look at the hundreds, I'm going to grab some unit cubes.
10,
10,
20.
20, 30 unit cubes over here.
Great. So all of those unit cubes can be put together into 3 longs to make 3/10. Or if you break down 3/10, they're going to be 30 little unit cubes, and each unit cube is worth 1/100. So there's 30 hundredths.
Okay, so now we know that 1 30 hundredths is equal to 1 3/10.
Correct.
Now we could look at the space in between.
Great. Okay, so now again, I can use what I know about the tick marks and count the spaces in between 1 30 hundredths and 1 40 hundredths. So this would be 1 31 hundredths, 1 32 hundredths, and F must be 1 33 hundredths.
Great
So
job.
1 whole and 33 hundredths.
I'm wondering if our students can find out what G is. What do you think?
I think they can, if they keep counting on.
Let's give them a second to try. So let's continue counting.
Great job. 1.
You want to count from here or here?
Let's count from F, what we already know.
Okay, F is 1
33 hundredths, 1 34 hundredths, 1 35 hundredths, 1 36 hundredths, 1 37 hundredths, 1 38 hundredths, 1 39 hundredths. So G is equal to 1 39 hundredths.
I have a question. Can we double check it and count from the opposite side?
Definitely. We could just count backwards.
So if we have 1 40 hundredths, what comes next?
1 39 hundredths, which
Perfect.
is correct.
Let's move on. Which decimal shown on the number line is not placed in the correct location? So boys and girls, why don't you try this on your own? Take a moment to solve the problem here.
Remember to look at the number line and the whole numbers and count the tick marks in between.
Okay, Ms. Schultz, let's count the tick marks. How many are there?
So from 0 to 1, let's count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8,
Sorry.
9, 10. So again, the number line is broken up into tenths. And I think I already kind of see what doesn't belong.
Yeah, I realized that there was a number on this line that you read that didn't match what you said.
Nope. So right away, I could tell that 9/10 is not where it belongs. Wrong answer.
What number does go there?
Okay, so I can look at 5/10 right in the middle that's labeled, and I can count up from there. 6/10, 7/10. So the correct label should be 0.77 tenths.
And where would, let's look at where 9/10 would actually go. So if this were 7/10, then we would have
8/10, 9/10. And that makes more sense because I know that 9/10 is closer to 1 whole 10/10 than it is to 5/10.
amazing. So I'm gonna put this here as our answer. And then we have a little explanation here, which is what?
So 9/10 is in the wrong spot because 9/10 is 9/10 the distance from 0 to 1. The point on the number line should be closer to 1 than it is to 5/10.
Amazing.
Great job, guys.
See you next time.